Contending for the faith is something that is very important no matter how much danger it puts us in and no matter how much people don't like what we're contending for. But today we're going to look at two ladies in the Bible who contended even when it was a very dangerous time and even when there were those, even in authority, who didn't like what they were contending for. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Contend podcast, coming to you from our new permanent location, my church office. We just got it remodeled, figured out. So this is our new location. We're excited about this episode. So let's just jump right into it. As I said in the intro, we're talking about two ladies who were willing to contend for the faith, even when it wasn't well accepted what they were contending for, and even when it was something that was even somewhat dangerous for them to be doing. We're in the book of Exodus today in the first chapter, in verses 15 and 16 of Exodus 1. It says, "And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah and the other and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live." And we'll pick up in just a couple moments there. But we see that this is right at the beginning of the book of Exodus, before Moses is even born, and obviously then before the children of Israel are led out of captivity. So they're in bondage here, and Pharaoh is looking at the children of Israel multiplying, and he's afraid that if Egypt is to go to war, that the Israelites will side with their adversary instead of Egypt, and then be freed from bondage because they were fighting against Egypt. So we see him come up with this idea to have the Hebrew midwives kill any male children that are born to the Hebrews. And we see here, as we're going to pick up here in just a minute, what these midwives decided to do. In verse 17, continuing, it says, "But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, Why have ye done this thing, and saved the men children alive?" Verse number 19, it says, "And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them." So we see them deciding and making a determination, kind of like what we looked at last week, talking about Daniel. He purposed in his heart that he wouldn't defile himself. We see that these women purposed that they feared God, as we see the apostles saying in the New Testament, it's better to obey God than man, and the importance of fearing God and having a reverence for God over what men tell us to do. And we see this come to fruition here as they in verse 17 or in verse 18, this is played out for, it doesn't say how long, but he calls them back in and says, "Why are you not doing what I told you to do?" And they say, "Well, what did they say? The Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women. They're lively, and before we even get there, they've had the child, so we're not able to kill it." And we see them making a decision to contend for the faith, even though this was obviously even pre-law. This was the Egyptians still had the God of Jehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because we see that in the book of Genesis, obviously. And they feared God rather than Pharaoh, rather than the king of Egypt. And so they said that they were gonna obey what God had commanded, so to speak, and they were gonna not kill the Hebrew children, that they were gonna let them live and let it continue on. And we see in verse 20, it continues, "Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty." We see this all leading up and kind of setting the stage, so to speak, for what happens in the next few chapters with Moses, and then he's in the desert and he's called back, and I'm not going to get too much into the life of Moses because I'm sure we'll talk about him here in the near future. But we see that as these midwives, they don't kill the children, and the children of Israel grow and grow. It sets the stage for that exodus from Egypt. And so we see the importance of contending for the faith. And no matter if someone doesn't like what we're doing, even if, quite frankly, if someone tells us not to contend for the faith, we need to make sure that we continue to contend for the faith. And not to bring too much of current events or anything into this, because this isn't necessarily a current event thing, although it's important every day. But we see precedents being set of people telling churches not to meet and things of that nature. And I'm not saying at all that this is the time where we stand on this hill and fall on our swords, so to speak. That's not this time. I don't believe that. I don't believe this is a religious persecution kind of thing with the coronavirus and things of that nature. However, this does set some precedents for that. We need to be willing to do what God has called us to do as Christians. He's called us to be the church, and He's called us to contend for the faith. And we need to be willing to do that even if people don't like what we're doing. There are going to be those who don't stand for what we stand for, don't like what we're doing, but we need to be willing to contend for the faith even if there are those who disagree with what we're doing and don't like the things that we're standing for. On Contend Wrap-Up today, we got 3 points that I want to give you to help you through as we contend for the faith during this coronavirus craziness, which will not end. Number 1, have faith in God. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to them who love God. That's still in the Bible. This is part of all things. This too shall pass, as they say, and we know that God is using it for His good. Eternity will tell what good this did, but it is being used for good. Number 2, stay in the Bible. Joshua 1:8 is still in there, the end of it. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous. That's only if we're in the Bible. I would encourage you, if you're off work or something of that nature, spend some extra time in God's Word. Maybe read an extra chapter a day. It'll be a great help to you. And then number 3, be the calm in the storm for your family, for your church, and those around you, your neighbors. Be the calm in the storm. God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. This too shall pass, as I said, and we don't have to get all wrapped up with the media and the social media, the hype of it. We can be the calm in the storm as Christians, as we contend for the faith, even in this uncertain time. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed this episode of the Contend podcast. The scriptures that we used in the lesson and also in the wrap-up are linked in the description below. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the page. Click the button and hit the bell for the notifications. And don't forget, don't be a pretender, be a contender.